All right. So, goddamn it, Ordis. All right. Hello and welcome. So, this last weekend, we talked a little bit about Hammershot on a stream, and I figured I should make a video about it because Hammershot is a mod that is just straight up not worth using, even though it might seem like it at first. So, to demonstrate this, and we don't need to go and like test and like show damage numbers for this because it's all pretty plain to see if you just do some basic multiplication. So here I have my like regular Soma build. This is what I use on most things, or most, yeah, just most enemies, as it were. And this is like totally fine. There are some people that would use, say, like heavy caliber instead of argon scope, and that's fine. And that doesn't really change anything here, whether or not you're using heavy caliber here or whatever. The important thing is what would be the first thing to go in this build, because there's mods that obviously gonna have to be here. Point Strike, Vital Sense, Serration, Split Chamber. These are just going in 100% of the time. I would argue Bladed Rounds is also going in 100% of the time, but I'll leave that. Just, there's people that argue against that. And obviously I said Argon Scope and Heavy Caliber. Like, these are probably the mods to put here. Critical Delay ain't making it into this build because that mod is also terrible in most cases. So the big thing that you actually have to decide on is whether or not you want to swap out an Elemental for Hammershot. And at face value, you look at Hammershot and you go plus 60% critical damage, plus 40% status chance, and you go, well, that seems pretty damn good. But we already have 120% extra critical damage from Vital Sense, which is way more than enough. This is a really high amount of like hiking your damage. But once you have this, Hammershot is much less valuable because this is not multiplicative with this. This is additive. So you have your base of 3 on this, and you add 120%, and you get 6.6. But if you were to add Hammershot, you get 1.8 extra. So even if you do this, you only get that extra 1.8. So you end up at 8.4. Also, this is obviously not counting in Bladed Rounds, which minus Hammershot, this puts you at 10.2 whenever you're under the effects of Bladed Rounds, which is actually super worth it. So the thing you have to weigh is whether or not that 60% critical damage is actually any good. Now remember, you're only getting that extra critical damage whenever you are critting, so it better be pretty good because it's more situational, even if it's only in a slight way, because I'm using Argon Scope. So, how much damage do we actually get as compared? Well, if we use this full elemental build, we do 165 total damage before we crit. There's a 6.6 critical multiplier. Not going to go into Bladed Rounds for the purposes of this because it won't matter in the long run. That's just like an additive thing, so we'll leave it out of here. But you are going to be using Vital Sense. So we'll say 6.6, and on your base build with that, like just this exact build, you're going to be doing 1,089 on your final crit damage, not counting headshots or anything like that, just raw output damage. Not like no contingency with like corrosive against ferrite armor or anything like that. 1,089 damage, which that's solid. Before modifiers, if you're firing this as like a heavy gunner plus 75% damage, that's a really high amount of damage per bullet for something that has a 200 round magazine and this fire rate. So you have that. But then we got to do the math for all the other ones. So because we're going to be removing an elemental, because that's the obvious choice here, because you're not removing Bladed Rounds for Hammershot, that's silly. You would add another elemental instead. The reason for that is because if we add Hammershot, we end up with 112 damage before we crit, which is about a 32% loss in our raw damage. And then we go up to an 8.4 critical multiplier, which is about a 27% increase in our crit multiplier. Then we end up with 940.8 final crit damage before we mod it out or get headshots or anything, which is a little over 100 damage lower than our full elemental build, which is obviously not very good. Also with that, you limit yourself more because you're only using a single elemental. If you go in and look at the damage tables for damage 2.0 with our combined elementals versus our basic elementals, outside of very specific cases, you always want a combined elemental. So not only is this going to be worse, just is in damage potential, using only one element is not good. You'll lose damage just by proxy of that, outside of very specific cases with very specific weapons. Not critical weapons by and large. But let's go beyond that. Let's say that you're looking to get the status. You want the status out of the hammer shot. Well, I have some good bad news. Let's say we're going to be using high voltage. So if we throw high voltage in here, we have 147.4 damage before we crit. Okay, it's about 11% loss in damage from our full elemental build. We have a 6.6 crit multiplier, which is the same as our regular full elemental build, and we end up with 972.84 final crit damage before modifiers. What that means is that you should never be using hammer shot. There's no reason to do so. It's just a bunch of raw disadvantages, because you also get an extra 20% status chance bonus whenever you're using one of these. So it's not like you have hammer shot that's a little bit less damage, but that says like 140% extra status chance, because that would actually be like, oh well, that's a choice. This is just raw worse than like a bunch of other mods that you could put into this slot, and that's why you don't use hammer shot. Yeah. If you guys have any specific questions or examples of places you actually would use hammer shot, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.